Greensboro is a city in the U.S. state of North Carolina. It is the third largest city by population in North Carolina and the largest city in Guilford County and the surrounding Piedmont Triad metropolitan region. According to the 2012 U.S. Census estimate, Greensboro's population is 277,080. It is located at the intersection of three major interstate highways in the Piedmont region of central North Carolina. In 2003, the previous Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point Metropolitan Statistical Area was redefined by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, resulting in the formation of the Greensboro High Point MSA and the Winston-Salem MSA. The 2010 population for the Greensboro High Point MSA was 723,801. The Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point Combined Statistical Area, popularly referred to as the Piedmont Triad, had a population of 1,599,477. In 1808, Greensboro was planned around a central courthouse square to succeed the nearby town of Guilford Courthouse as the county seat. This act moved the county courts closer to the geographical center of the county, a location more easily reached by the majority of the county's citizens. History. Early history. At the time of European encounter, the inhabitants of the area that became Greensboro were a Siouan-speaking people called the Saura, Quaker immigrant settlers from Pennsylvania, by way of Maryland, arrived at Cape Fear in about 1750 and began organized religious services affiliated with the Cane Creek Friends meeting in Snow Camp in 1751. 3 years later, 40 Quaker families were granted approval to establish New Garden monthly meeting. The settlement grew rapidly during the next 3 years, adding members from as far away as Nantucket Island in Massachusetts. It soon became the most important Quaker community in the North Carolina and mother of several other Quaker meetings that were established in the state and west of the Appalachians. The city of Greensboro was named for Major General Nathanael Greene, commander of the American forces at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse on March 15, 1781. Although the Americans lost the battle, Greene's forces inflicted heavy casualties on the British Army of General Charles Cornwallis. After the battle, Cornwallis withdrew his troops to a British base in Wilmington, North Carolina. Greensboro was established near the geographic center of Guilford County, on land that was an unbroken forest with thick undergrowth of huckleberry bushes that bore a finely flavored fruit. Property for the future village was purchased for $98, and 3 north-south streets were laid out intersecting with 3 east-west streets. The courthouse stood at the center of the intersection of Elm and Market Streets. By 1821, the town was home to 369 residents. In the early 1840s, Greensboro was selected by the state government at the request of then-Governor Moorhead for inclusion on a new railroad line. The city grew substantially in size and soon became known as the Gate City, due to its role as a transportation hub for the state. The railroads transported goods to and from textile mills, which grew up with their own mill villages around the city. Many of these businesses remained in the city until the 21st century, when most of them went bankrupt, reorganized, and/or merged with other companies. Greensboro remains as a major textile headquarters with the main offices of International Textile Group, Galian Lord, Unify, and VF Corporation. The importance of rail traffic continues for the city, as Greensboro serves as a major regional freight hub, and 4 Amtrak passenger trains stop in Greensboro daily on the main Norfolk Southern line between Washington and New Orleans by way of Atlanta. Though the city developed slowly, early wealth generated from cotton trade and merchandising led to the construction of several notable buildings. The earliest, later named Blandwood Mansion and Gardens, was built in 1795. Additions to this residence in 1846, designed by Alexander Jackson Davis of New York City, made the house an influential landmark in the nation as America's earliest Tuscan villa. Other significant estates followed, including Dunleith, designed by Samuel Sloan, Belmead, and the Bumpastroy House. American Civil War and final days of the Confederacy. Although Guilford County did not vote for secession, once North Carolina joined the Confederacy, some citizens joined the Confederate cause, forming such infantry units as the Guilford Greys. From 1861 to March 1865, the city was relatively untouched by the American Civil War, with the exception of dealing with shortages of clothing, medicines, and other items caused by the U.S. naval blockade of the South. However, in the final weeks of the war, Greensboro played a significant role. In April 1865, General P.G.T. Beauregard was instructed by the commanding officer of the Army of Tennessee, General Joseph E. Johnston, to prepare for a defense of the city. During this time, Confederate President Jefferson Davis and the remaining members of the Confederate cabinet had evacuated the Confederate capital in Richmond, Virginia, and moved south to Danville, Virginia. When Union cavalry threatened Danville, Davis and his cabinet managed to escape by train and reassembled in Greensboro on April 11, 1865. While in Greensboro, Davis and his cabinet decided to try to escape overseas to avoid capture by the victorious Union forces. They left Greensboro and separated. As such, Greensboro is notable as the last place the entire Confederate government met as a group. Greensboro is thus the final capital city of the Confederacy. At nearly the same time, Governor Zebulon B. Vance fled the capital of North Carolina in anticipation of the arrival of Union General William Tecumseh Sherman. For a brief period beginning April 16, 1865, the capital of North Carolina was maintained in Greensboro. Governor Vance proclaimed the North Carolina Surrender Declaration on April 28, 1865. Later, Vance turned himself over to Union officials in the parlor of Blandwood Mansion. In the words of historian Blackwell Robinson, Greensboro witnessed not only the demise of the Confederacy but also that of the old civil government of the state of North Carolina. After the negotiations were completed at Bennett Place, now in present-day Durham, North Carolina, between General Johnston and General Sherman on April 26, 1865, Confederate soldiers stacked their arms and received their paroles in Greensboro, and then headed for home. Industrialization and growth. In the 1890s, the city continued to attract attention from northern industrialists, including Moses and Caesar Cone of Baltimore. The Cone brothers established large-scale textile plants, changing Greensboro from a village to a city within a decade. By 1900, Greensboro was considered a center of the southern textile industry, with large-scale factories producing denim, flannel, and overalls. Prosperity brought to the city through textiles resulted in the construction of notable 20th-century civic architecture, including the Guilford County Courthouse, West Market Street United Methodist Church by S. W. Falk, several buildings designed by Frank A. Weston, and the Julius I. Fuss Building of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro designed by Orlo Epps. During the 20th century, Greensboro continued to expand in wealth and population. Rapid growth led to construction of grand commercial and civic buildings, many of which stand today. Designed by hometown architects Charles Hartman and Harry Barton. Other notable industries became established in the city, including Vicks Chemical Co., Carolina Steel Corporation, and Pomona Terracotta Works. During this period of growth, Greensboro experienced an acute housing shortage. Builders sought a construction goal of 80 to 100 affordable housing units per year to provide homes for workers. Greensboro's real estate was considered the wonder of the state during the 1920s. Growth continued through the Great Depression, as Greensboro added an estimated 200 new families per year to its population. The city earned a reputation as a well-planned community, with a strong emphasis on education, parks, and a profitable employment base. Prosperity brought new levels of development involving nationally and internationally known architects. Walter Gropius designed a factory building in the city in 1944. Greensboro-based Ed Lowenstein contributed designs for projects throughout the region. Eduardo Catalano and George Matsumoto brought designs to the city that challenged North Carolinians with modernist architectural concepts and forms. Civil rights movement. In 1960, the Census Bureau reported Greensboro's population as 74.0% white and 25.8% black. As Greensboro evolved into one of North Carolina's primary cities, changes began to occur in its traditional social structure. On February 1, 1960, 4 black college students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College sat down at an all-white Woolworth's lunch counter, and refused to leave after they were denied service. The 4 students purchased small items in other parts of the store, kept their receipts, then sat down at the lunch counter and asked to be served. After being denied service, they produced their receipts and asked why their money was good everywhere else at the store, but not at the lunch counter. Hundreds of others soon joined in this sit-in, which lasted several months. Such protests quickly spread across the South, ultimately leading to the desegregation of Woolworths and other chains. The original lunch counter and stalls where the 4 first sat are in their original location, now home to the International Civil Rights Center and Museum. The museum opened on February 1, 2010, the 50th anniversary of the sit-ins. After the desegregation of Woolworths and other minor concessions by Greensboro's white community, a brief period of patience and negotiation was followed by further protests in 1962 and 1963, culminating in the largest civil rights protest to take place in North Carolina history. In addition to the desegregation of public accommodations, protesters sought economic and social justice, such as hiring policies based on merit and the integration of public schools. Marches of over 2,000 protesters per night took place in Greensboro's segregated Central Business District. William Thomas and A. Knighton Stanley, coordinators of Greensboro's local court chapter, invited Jesse Jackson, then a student at A&T, to join the protests. Jackson quickly rose to prominence as a student leader and public representative of the protest movement, invoking arrest by violating segregation rules of local businesses, trespassing, and other non-violent breaches of the law. Soon became a primary tactic of the protesters, especially among college and high school students, seeking to overflow city jails and overburden municipal resources. At one point approximately 1,400 blacks occupied Greensboro's jails, which drew serious attention from Greensboro's mayor and the governor of North Carolina, Terry Sanford. In the end, the protests achieved gains toward racial equality in the form of further desegregation, reformed hiring policies in city government, and commitments to progress by Greensboro's mayor and Governor Sanford, who declared, "Anyone who hasn't received this message doesn't understand human nature." However, though these concessions helped build progressive momentum, significant change in race relations came about at a painfully slow pace, and verbal commitments from white leadership in 1963 proved to be more symbolic victories than substantial ones. In May 1969, A&T was involved in a second incident where the students at James B. Dudley High School appealed to them when a popular candidate for student union class president was refused, allegedly due to his position with Youth for the Unity of Black Society. On May 21, after student protesters began throwing rocks and were confronted by police with tear gas canisters, An uprising led to gunfire exchanges between protesters, police and the National Guard. Escalating violence eventually led to the invasion of the A&T campus by what was described at the time as the most massive armed assault ever made against an American university. The uprising ended soon after the National Guard made a sweep of A&T college dormitories, taking hundreds of students into protective custody. A report released by the North Carolina State Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights found the National Guard invasion reckless and disproportionate to the actual danger, and criticized local community leaders for failing to help the Dudley High School students when the issues first emerged. They declared it a sad commentary that the only group in the community who would take the Dudley students seriously were the students at A&T State University. In spite of this period of progress, old wounds had yet to heal and prejudices continued. On November 3, 1979, members of the Communist Workers' Party were holding an anti-Ku Klux Klan rally when two cars containing KKK supporters drove into the Morningside Heights neighborhood where the rally was being held and opened fire on the protest. 4 local TV news stations filmed the event as it happened. A pistol was fired by a CWP organizer and the Klan cars were beaten with sticks before the shooting. 5 of the anti-Klan demonstrators were killed and 7 were wounded. Television footage of the event was shown nationwide and around the world, and the event became known as the Greensboro Massacre. In November 1986, of the accused KKK supporters were all acquitted by an all-white jury after a week of deliberations. In 1985, a civil suit found 5 police officers and 2 other individuals liable for $350,000 in damages to be paid to the Greensboro Justice Fund.